You're no longer welcome here, Rebecca. This house belongs to me now. And Olivia, I stood frozen. The words slammed into my chest like a freight train. Richard, the man I once called Dad, was pointing toward the front door of the house I had paid for. A house I had spent 13 years filling with care, compromise, and quiet suffering. Behind him, Ethan just stood there. My husband, my partner, my mistake. His eyes didn't meet mine. Not once, not even when I whispered, "You can't be serious." Grace, his mother, was pretending to fumble with her cane. But I knew her act. I'd seen it for years. Selective memory, convenient confusion. Her so-called dementia always kicked in when it suited her. And Olivia, she didn't bother pretending. She stood with her arms folded, chin up, smirking like a cat that had just swallowed a songbird. "You should have read the deed transfer paperwork more carefully," she said coldly. "But I guess that's the lawyer in you. Too busy saving everyone else, you forgot to protect yourself." I felt something crack inside me. Not anger, not even heartbreak, just stillness. The kind of stillness you feel right before a storm rips through the sky. I had built this life with blood and bone. Every mortgage payment, every grocery run, every moment spent feeding a family that never saw me as one of them. I bathed Grace. I fed Richard. I even helped Ethan through his company's bankruptcy. I gave until I had nothing left to give. And now they were discarding me like yesterday's trash. "You want me out," I said quietly, locking eyes with Ethan. He hesitated. That was all I needed. I took a slow step back. And then another. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I smiled. It wasn't the smile of a woman defeated. It was the smile of someone who just remembered who the hell she really was. "You think you've won," I said softly. "But this isn't over." I turned, heels echoing against the polished floor as I walked toward the bedroom, my bedroom to pack. The only thing I had left, my dignity. Because they forgot one thing. I'm not just some woman. I'm a lawyer, and they just turned me into their worst nightmare. They say gratitude makes us human, but sometimes it turns us into prisoners. I met Ethan Parker when I was 29, just after my world had collapsed. My father had passed away that spring, leaving behind a stack of unpaid debts and a tiny, crumbling townhouse in Denton. He hadn't been reckless, just unlucky. His small construction business was swept under by a bad partnership, and by the time the lawyers came knocking, our family name had become a cautionary tale. I was finishing law school back then, working night shifts, eating ramen, tutoring high school kids just to survive. And then Ethan appeared. He wasn't flashy or loud. He listened. He cooked. He brought peace to a girl who had only ever known pressure. When I told him about the debt, I'll never forget how he said it. "You're not marrying the money, Rebecca. You're marrying me. And I'll talk to my parents. We'll find a way." And they did. The Parkers paid off nearly $100,000 just like that. They said it wasn't charity. Richard smiled and called it an investment in family. I believed them. 2 months later, we married in a quiet courthouse ceremony. No fancy dress, no champagne. Just a promise I would pay them back in full once I passed the bar and started working. They told me it wasn't necessary, but I insisted. And when I did pass that bar, the way Ethan lifted me off the ground in front of that courthouse, God, I still remember the way his arms trembled. He said he was proud, said I was the strongest woman he'd ever met. I believed him too. We moved to Austin shortly after. I joined a mid-sized law firm. Ethan worked remotely for a tech company out of Seattle. Life was simple until Richard had a fall. It was bad. He broke his hip, needed surgery, The doctors said he'd walk again, but recovery would be slow and expensive. That's when I suggested building them a new home. Single level, no stairs, barrier-free. I wanted to give back to show them their kindness hadn't gone unnoticed. We bought a lot just west of the Colorado River, halfway between Ethan's co-working space and my firm. It cost nearly $470,000 when all was said and done. I covered the down payment, took out a 30-year mortgage under my name. I didn't even flinch. Grace tried to protest, at first said it was too generous, but Richard nodded. And Ethan put his arm around me and whispered, "It's okay. They need this, and we'll be right there to take care of them." I moved them in myself, helped set up their bedroom, labeled all the light switches, programmed the thermostat, even stocked the fridge. A week later, Grace took my hand in hers and said, "You're not just a daughter-in-law, you're our daughter," I cried, and I kept crying, even as the years went on and the praise stopped coming. At first, it was small things. Richard would call for me from across the house. Instead of using the bell, Grace would ask me to explain the same thing 3 times in a row, then scold me for raising my voice. Ethan started staying later at work, then started sleeping in the guest room just to get better rest. I should have said something, but how do you complain about the people who once saved your life? So I told myself I was strong, that I owed them, that this was what love looked like, quiet, patient, enduring. The mortgage didn't pay itself. I worked 60 hours a week, sometimes more. But I still came home every night to cook, to clean, to lift Richard onto his chair when his back locked up, to guide Grace when she forgot where the bathroom was. When my mom passed, there was no one left to check on me, no one to ask if I was okay. I remember once, just once, I told Ethan I was overwhelmed, that I was exhausted and starting to forget who I was. He rubbed my back and said, "It'll get better. Just hang in there, babe." Then he left to play Call of Duty for 6 hours straight, but I stayed because I remembered what Richard had done, what Grace had said, what Ethan had promised. And promises, they meant something to me. I didn't realize until much later that they didn't mean the same to them. There were moments when I caught glimpses Olivia whispering in Grace's ear, then looking at me with a smirk. Ethan getting jumpy when I asked about the joint account. Richard refusing to let me see the mailbox, saying there's nothing for you. Still, I pushed it aside because I was the strong one, because I thought family meant something, because I had spent so long surviving. I didn't realize I wasn't living. 13 years passed, and every one of them carved a little more out of me until there was hardly anything left. But I didn't break, because I knew one day that last mortgage payment would be made. And maybe, just maybe, I'd finally be free. Maybe then they'd look at me and see what I had given. But I was wrong. They weren't waiting to thank me. They were waiting to throw me out. It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of Tuesday that feels too normal, where the sun filters through the kitchen window just right, and the house smells like cinnamon from the candle you lit after work. I had just finished loading the dishwasher. The last mortgage payment had cleared that morning, 13 years every dollar accounted for. I even saved the confirmation email like it was some kind of trophy. In a way, it was. I stood in front of the fridge with a glass of wine in my hand, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Relief, but that moment lasted maybe 3 minutes. Ethan walked in, cracking open a bottle of craft beer he'd brought home. He sat across the island elbows, resting on the counter, smiling like someone who'd just won the lottery. "You know," he said, "now that the house is finally paid off, I think it's time we celebrate." I blinked. He had never not once mentioned the mortgage before. In 13 years, he'd never asked how much was left. never offered to pitch in, never even glanced at the statements I kept on the office shelf. My eyes narrowed. Why the sudden interest? He shrugged, sipping from his glass. Just proud of you, babe. You did it. And I think that deserves something big, like a weekend getaway. Maybe Napa just us. A getaway. After years of cold dinners and colder silences, I didn't trust it, but I wanted to. So I smiled. Yes, that sounds nice. He leaned forward, reached for my hand, and kissed the top of it, like he used to. And for a second, I let myself believe the lie. 3 days later, I came home from work to find the living room filled with people. Ethan, his parents, Olivia, all seated like they were holding some kind of intervention. I dropped my briefcase at the door. What's going on? Richard stood first. He had a manila folder in one hand and that smug, rehearsed look on his face, the one he used whenever he had something to say he knew would hurt. Rebecca, he said, you've been a wonderful help to this family. Truly. Pause. But now that the house is paid off, it's time we talk about next steps. I didn't like where this was going. Grace sat stiffly, lips pursed. Olivia stared straight at me, arms crossed, eyebrow cocked. Ethan wouldn't even look up. What do you mean, next steps? I asked carefully. Richard opened the folder. Inside was a deed transfer signed, notarized, dated 2 weeks ago. The house is now under the ownership of Benjamin and Olivia, he said. You'll have until the end of the week to vacate. My heart stopped. I took a step back, gripping the edge of the couch. I paid for this house, every cent. You can't just— It was never yours, Grace cut in sharply. Her voice, normally soft and wandering, suddenly clear as glass. You built it for the family, Olivia added. And now, the family has decided how best to use it. My mouth went dry. You forged this. You forged my name. Ethan finally looked up. No one forged anything. You just didn't read the refinance documents carefully. You added them to the title 6 months ago when you signed those forms for tax purposes. You handed it over voluntarily. I felt sick. That was the document Olivia told me was to simplify inheritance filings. I didn't read it. I was tired. I was busy. I trusted them. Why, I asked. Why would you do this to me? Grace smiled, the same way she smiled the day she told me she'd never seen a working woman as disconnected from family values. Because, she said sweetly, we thought you'd be grateful. But instead you started acting like you owned the place. Richard chuckled. You were always just the help, Rebecca, a live-in nurse with a law degree. Ethan stood then, finally showing some spine. I'm done, Rebecca. I want a divorce. This us, it's not working. And frankly, it hasn't in a long time. I stared at him, my ears ringing. A divorce. No warning, no discussion, just a full ambush. You knew, I whispered. You planned this. He didn't deny it. My knees almost buckled. I felt like I was underwater, every sound muffled and distorted. And the debt, I said, the money I paid back to your family. All of it. What was that? Just a down payment for this betrayal? Richard shrugged. We helped you get back on your feet. You helped us build a home. I'd say we're even. Even, I had scrubbed their floors, driven Grace to every doctor's appointment, worked myself to the bone just to be dismissed like an old employee who'd outlived her usefulness. And they called it even. I turned to Ethan, eyes burning. Do you even love me? I asked. He didn't answer. Silence is an answer too. Olivia stood smoothing her blouse. There's no point dragging this out. The house is no longer yours. The marriage is over. You should start packing. Grace's voice floated in after her. And don't forget to leave your key. I felt something rise in my chest, something dark and ancient. But I didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't beg. I looked at them all, each face colder than the last. Then I straightened my spine and smiled. It wasn't forgiveness, it was a promise. "You'll regret this," I said, voice steady. "Oh, Rebecca." Richard laughed. "What can you possibly do?" I picked up my briefcase, walked past them, up the stairs, and shut the door. They thought I was finished. They thought they'd erased me, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. I was their biggest mistake, and now I was about to become their biggest problem. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the edge of the guest bed, no longer allowed to use the master, apparently staring at the half-packed suitcase beside me. My toothbrush was still in the bathroom. My clothes hung untouched in the closet. But something deeper than my body had already been evicted. They had taken my house, my marriage, my sense of home. But what gutted me more was the quiet. No one came to check on me. No one knocked to see if I was okay. The people I had once called family had vanished into their own silence. By morning, I'd made a decision. I left the house before sunrise without saying a word. I didn't slam the door, didn't leave a note, just grabbed my things and vanished like they wanted me to. But I didn't run. I regrouped. My first stop was a small extended stay apartment on the outskirts of Austin. 1 bedroom, thin walls, no hot water after 9 p.m., but it was mine. For the first time in years, no one yelled my name down the hallway or left laundry on the floor or asked why dinner wasn't ready. It was quiet, painfully quiet. I ate boxed salads, worked late, cried in the shower where no one could hear. And then, one night, my phone rang. It was a number I hadn't seen in months. Benjamin, Ethan's older brother, the so-called black sheep of the Parker family, ex-Marine, now a contractor, and apparently newly separated from Olivia. I hesitated. Then I picked up. "Rebecca," he said, voice low. "I heard what happened." I waited. He sighed. "I didn't know about the deed transfer, about the divorce. Olivia kept me in the dark, said it was just a tax thing, never mentioned your name once." I didn't speak. "Listen," he continued, "you don't have to trust me. God knows no one else in that family deserves it. But if you want help, I'm here." Something in his voice cracked through me. Not pity, not guilt. Anger. He was angry for me. And just like that, I wasn't alone anymore. The next day, we met at a diner off the highway. He looked different, older, leaner, scar on his temple. I didn't remember, but his eyes hadn't changed. "I want to make this right," he said. "Not because I'm your ex-brother-in-law, but because I know what betrayal looks like. I've worn that badge too." He handed me a USB drive. "Start here." Inside was everything: bank records, Ethan's secret transfers to Olivia, documents showing how the refinancing had been manipulated, text messages Grace sent Olivia mocking me, planning how to evict me quietly, even a draft email from Richard discussing the legal gray area of pushing a signature without full consent. It wasn't just a betrayal, it was a coordinated attack, and I had receipts. That night, I powered up my laptop and pulled up the firm's client database. Then I made one call. Marcus Duval, senior partner, mentor, the man who'd given me my first case. He didn't even let me finish. "I'm in," he said. "Let's bury them." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of coffee emails and evidence sorting. I reviewed every document Ethan had ever forwarded, just for review. Every login credential he'd stored on our shared Google Drive. Every voicemail from Grace. Every surveillance clip I'd accidentally saved from my laptop's webcam during remote depositions in the living room, moments where they'd yelled, mocked, and cornered me. They didn't know I'd been recording. They didn't even remember the camera was on. But I did. And every second was now documented, transcribed, and secured with legal timestamps. Meanwhile, Benjamin worked behind the scenes. He filed a property challenge arguing that the deed transfer had been done under duress and without informed consent. And while he did that, Marcus drafted the suit: constructive fraud, emotional abuse, financial coercion. Even Olivia's name was on the list as a willing participant in the fraudulent reassignment of property. We weren't just fighting back. We were setting fire to their whole plan. Then came the confrontation. It was a Thursday afternoon. I asked my firm's receptionist to prepare a meeting room. At 3:00 p.m. sharp, Ethan, Richard, Grace, and Olivia walked in, looking like they were ready for war. They didn't know we had the higher ground. I sat across from them with Marcus on my right and Benjamin on my left. No one said a word for a full 30 seconds. Then Ethan finally asked, "What is this?" I slid a folder across the table. Inside, photocopies of everything: text threads, video stills, bank movements. Medical records showing Grace's condition was never formally diagnosed as dementia, just mild cognitive fog. "This," I said, "is the part where you explain yourselves." Ethan tried to laugh. "This isn't a courtroom." No, Marcus cut in, "But it will be." He pulled out a letter, formal notice of the lawsuit. Olivia went pale. Richard stiffened. Grace blinked and asked if we were still getting lunch after this. And Ethan, he folded. "What do you want?" he asked. I stood. "I want my house back. I want my name cleared. I want restitution for every dime you stole." And every night I went to sleep thinking I was loved. I leaned forward, locking eyes with each of them. "And above all, I want you to know that you didn't break me." No one answered. They couldn't, because for the first time in their lives, they were speechless. After they left, I sat in that room alone. Not because I was weak, but because I needed to feel what victory tasted like in silence. It wasn't loud. It wasn't explosive. It was clean, precise, like truth cutting through the fog. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was rebuilding, and this time on my terms. The court date was set for April 3rd, but the battle began long before that. Marcus filed the lawsuit with surgical precision, naming all 4 defendants: Ethan Parker, Richard Parker, Grace Parker, and Olivia Parker. The charges: constructive fraud, emotional manipulation, financial coercion, and civil theft through deception. The case wasn't just about a house. It was about 13 years of my life, stripped, bent, and twisted for their benefit. It was about making sure they never did this to anyone else. Public interest in the case exploded. A respected lawyer betrayed by her own family-in-law, tricked out of her home, after paying every cent of the mortgage. The story was on every local blog, legal podcast, even the morning radio. But none of that mattered to me. What mattered was walking into that courtroom with my head high and my truth intact. The courtroom was cold. Fluorescent lights buzzed above, and every footstep echoed like it had something to prove. Ethan looked thinner than I remembered, nervous, jittery. His tie was crooked. Grace wore a lavender shawl and carried the same worn leather purse I used to help her find every morning. She kept glancing around the room like she was at a brunch, not a civil trial. Richard sat stone-faced, arms crossed. His expression screamed defiance. And Olivia, she didn't look at me once. Good. I didn't need their eyes. I needed their accountability. The judge, an older woman named Justice Harper, took the bench without fanfare. She was known for her no-nonsense approach and brutal memory. If there was any hope of slipping through loopholes, it would die in her courtroom. Marcus opened with a calm, clear summary. He spoke of sacrifice, how I had paid the mortgage, in full fulfilled every familial obligation, and done so in good faith. He laid out the timeline: years of servitude, disguised as marriage emotional gaslighting, wrapped in duty and a legal transfer based on lies. He showed the receipts, the emails, the altered documents. The video stills me, begging for help, being mocked, ignored, dismissed. Then came the footage. From my laptop webcam, the one they never noticed was recording. Ethan telling Grace to just fake it if she had to. Olivia laughing about how I walk around like she owns the place, when she doesn't even read what she signs. Richard talking about how he never should have trusted a woman who out-earns her husband. There was no music, no dramatic soundtrack, just raw silence and truth. The judge leaned back when the footage ended. She didn't speak right away. Then she looked directly at Ethan. "Mr. Parker," she said flatly, "do you have any response to this footage?" Ethan stood slowly. I didn't think she was recording. I mean, this wasn't all malicious." "Wrong answer." Harper didn't flinch. "So you're not denying what we saw, just regretting you were caught." The courtroom went still. Ethan sat down. Grace tried to speak next. Her lawyer objected. She pushed his hand away. "I'm a sick woman," she said loudly. "I have memory issues. Sometimes I don't know what I'm doing." Harper raised an eyebrow. "You're under oath, Mrs. Parker. Do you have a formal medical diagnosis stating you are mentally incompetent?" Grace blinked, then looked at Olivia. "No," she whispered. The defense tried to pivot, claiming emotional misunderstanding blurred boundaries, a family matter blown out of proportion. But no one was buying it. Not after the footage. Not after the financial trail. Not after hearing my voice on that recording say, "Please, I just want to be seen, just once, as more than what I do for you." By the third day of trial settlement, talks began. They didn't want this dragged through another week of headlines and humiliation. Marcus pulled me aside with a proposal: $70,000 in restitution, full transfer of the house deed back to me, a public notarized apology from all 4 defendants filed into the court record, and most importantly, a court-ordered non-contact clause. They would never speak to me, visit me, or show up at my place of work again. Violation would trigger immediate legal penalty. Marcus asked if I wanted to push for more. I could have. I had the leverage, the sympathy, the moral high ground. But I also had something else: peace. And peace doesn't always scream for punishment. Sometimes it just needs closure. I nodded. Accept it. When we left the courthouse, Benjamin was waiting on the steps. He handed me an envelope. Inside were the new deed papers, legally verified, notarized, and clean. "Welcome home," he said quietly. I smiled. For the first time in months, it was real. I never saw Ethan again. He moved to Arizona shortly after, according to Benjamin. Grace and Richard live in a senior rental complex near Waco, now sharing a space and splitting bills. Olivia divorced Benjamin 2 months later. She's working double shifts at a retail chain, slowly repaying what little she could contribute toward the settlement. I didn't ask for more. I didn't need to. The truth had done enough. And me, I renovated the house, painted the walls, changed the locks, donated every dish, curtain, and pillowcase they ever touched. It wasn't a monument to what they took from me. It was a testament to what I rebuilt, alone, with no applause, no witnesses, just strength. The kind that doesn't need permission or forgiveness. ChatGPT said the house is quiet now. Not the kind of quiet that suffocates you like it used to. This quiet feels earned, peaceful, solid, like the silence after a storm finally passes, and you step outside barefoot just to feel the earth again. It's been 14 months since the case closed. The house, my house, is finally mine, not just on paper, but in every sense that matters. I walk through the living room each morning with fresh coffee in hand, passing the fireplace where Grace once staged her forgetfulness, where Richard barked orders like a retired general who thought compassion was weakness. None of them live here now, and neither does their shadow. The walls have been repainted warm whites and soft olive greens. The couch is new, so is the front door, the locks, the flooring, the light fixtures. And me, I kept one thing, the dent on the kitchen counter. It happened during a Thanksgiving years ago. Ethan dropped the carving knife and panicked like he'd just broken a priceless artifact. I laughed until I cried. It was one of the last real memories I have of us. Before everything became strategy, I kept it not because it was happy, but because it reminded me even the people who hurt you once made you smile. Even now, I don't regret helping them. I regret forgetting myself in the process. My life now, it's full. I still work at the firm, promoted last quarter to senior litigation counsel. My caseload is heavy, but it keeps me sharp. I speak twice a month at shelters and clinics, sharing my story with women going through financial abuse or legal manipulation in marriage. Some cry, some nod, some leave quietly with their eyes downcast, but a few they come up after, and they say, I thought I was crazy. I thought I was the only one. And I tell them the truth. You're not crazy. You're not weak. You're not alone. I've started a support initiative called Second Foundation. We help women in professional fields navigate legal systems when home becomes hostile. We teach them how to document, how to protect assets, how to recognize red flags when they come disguised as wedding vows and Sunday dinners. It's the thing I wish I had, so I built it for them and for me. Benjamin and I talk sometimes. Not often, just enough. He checks in when he drives through Austin. He always says the same thing before hanging up. I still owe you more than you think. And I always reply, we both escaped something. He divorced Olivia 6 months after the case. He sold their house, started fresh near San Antonio. He seems lighter, like me. Sometimes people ask how I forgave them. I didn't. I forgave myself for staying too long, for loving too blindly, for ignoring my own exhaustion in the name of loyalty. That was the real betrayal, abandoning myself to stay inside someone else's version of love. I won't do that again. Not for anyone. What did I learn? Everything. I learned that love without respect is just control wearing perfume. That marriage isn't a contract, it's a collaboration. And if you're the only one investing, then you're not in a partnership. You're in servitude. I learned that financial abuse isn't always obvious. It's not about bruises or screaming fights. Sometimes it's silence. It's gaslighting. It's signing something while exhausted and trusting. It's being told you're too emotional when you notice the math doesn't add up. But most of all, I learned that being strong doesn't mean never falling apart. It means knowing how to build yourself back better, stronger, wiser, worthy. This house now has new laughter in it. Friends come over for wine nights. I have music playing while I cook. There are fresh flowers on the table every week. Not because someone buys them for me, but because I do. And that's enough. No, it's everything.